There is no beating around the bush about this. The Battlefront Collection was an absolute disaster, and now everyone has decided to abandon that game and decided to hop onto EA's Battlefront 2 from 2017, because let's be honest, the Battlefront Collection, well, it's a load of shit. Battlefront had come back into the gaming sphere in 2015 with EA's take on the franchise, which did very, very well, although it was fairly limited with it being stuck in the original trilogy. However, EA's Battlefront 2 was widely anticipated back in 2017, as Star Wars was back in the full view of everyone with the release of The Force Awakens, and Battlefront 2 looked to incorporate all eras of Star Wars, from the prequel series to the new sequel series. And it was probably a great help that Battlefront 2 was being released shortly before The Last Jedi, meaning that Star Wars hype was at the biggest it had been in a long time. And Battlefront 2, honestly, looked phenomenal, graphically and gameplay wise, from the trailers we got to see before the game's release and even through the beta. But when the game's beta first came out, people were shocked and appalled by the card system, locking progression away from you through a huge time gap. However, when the game released, it got so much worse, with the introduction of loot boxes, where you would pay for these cards that you would get through randomized loot boxes, meaning that there would be a huge skill gap between players who paid for cards and those who just wanted to play the game. And don't worry, I have a whole video about the loot box controversy that started with Battlefront 2, so feel free to click the first link in the description below to check that out. But generally, Battlefront 2 was perceived as good, but not perfect, and that meant that people were skeptical at first to hop in. Yes, because there was some pay-to-win aspects like locking heroes behind in-game currency, etc., and players were vocal about it, and EA and DICE made the appropriate changes and eventually made Battlefront 2 a game that people would always return to, especially me, because it's all about the quality of the game, and EA did a tremendous job with the presentation of Battlefront 2. It is still one of the best looking titles out there. Yes, it may be shy of about a decade old, but it truly is a beautiful looking game. The devs really took care in trying to succeed in recreating the Star Wars universe for us all to play. The blasters and the lightsabers felt so authentic to the movies that you couldn't help but feeling fully immersed in the experience. And often enough, players got to explore areas of locations that you'd never seen before from the movies and TV shows. Almost every room in a map was explorable, showing the care and attention the DICE really put into this game. But while we're briefly on the topic of sounds, it's really fantastic that EA and DICE brought back the actors from the Clone Wars TV show to play their parts once again, meaning the experience sounded like Star Wars because these are the characters we know and they sound like the characters we know. They are the characters. Much like all the other Battlefront games, you can enter both third and first person in gameplay, unless you're playing as a hero or a villain character, which, I'm not gonna lie, really frustrated me, because who wouldn't want to swing a lightsaber in first person? I really don't think I could find anyone who would say no. These characters span from Grievous and Anakin to Luke and Vader to Rey and Kylo Ren, as well as many other iconic Star Wars characters as well. And this is very much unlike EA's Battlefront 1, where there were actually only 2 lightsaber wielding characters in the game due to when the game was set in the original trilogy, even though Kenobi also had a lightsaber. But of course, how would you balance that? But anyway, this time they didn't fill the character roster with less established characters like in Battlefront 1, and instead focused on characters that every single casual Star Wars fan would know. But you never always got to play as a hero. When playing as standard troopers or infantry, you'd have multiple classes to choose from, much like the original Battlefront from 2005, and very much unlike Battlefront 1 from 2015, where you made the class yourself yourself. And this certainly gave the gameplay a tiny bit more structure, and also made it easier for players to read the battlefield, or battlefront if you want to pardon the pun, seeing all the different and recognisable classes on the battlefield. The multiplayer in Battlefront 2 is genuinely some of the most intense that I have ever seen. Not because of realism, because I'd actually argue that the game is more of an arcade shooter than a realistic one, but you're always trying to dodge roll out of the way of enemy fire, or trying to avoid a hero character mowing down your entire team, and they get to do that across tons of iconic Star Wars locations. And that's partly due to the lack of support with the Battlefront Collection, whereas DICE did multiple huge updates for Battlefront 2, including new maps, modes, characters, all along the way up to 2019 with the release of The Rise of Skywalker. This type of support is something that has become less and less frequent in recent years, but was certainly something that fans loved about the game, where they felt that they were listened to. And the fact that the DLC for Battlefront 2 from 2017 was free massively helped the longevity of the game's overall player base. Because the game wasn't paywalled off where you had to pay for specific content like in the first Battlefront game from EA. And so the fact that everything was readily available for everyone to experience certainly helped in keeping Battlefront 2 alive for many years to come. If players genuinely didn't like something or wanted certain characters or content brought into the game, then most likely it was to be added at some point or another. The player base really had a say in what happened in Battlefront 2, and that type of community power doesn't happen very often in an era where if a game is not successful or an amazing hit, then the devs just abandon it immediately. The content that was released for Battlefront 2 was exactly what the fans wanted and expected from a Star Wars game. The biggest DLC by far had to be when Kenobi and General Grievous were brought into the game with Geonosis. The hype was genuinely unimaginable, as well as releasing content for every new Star Wars film that was coming out post Force Awakens. These DLC were deliberately big, and that was the main thing that kept players coming back for more, especially with it being free and mostly releasing consistently. Not to mention the quality of the DLCs were outstanding. Every single part of each DLC, from the new locations, the new characters and modes, were created with such passion and devotion poured into them by the devs, as they were lovingly recreating some of our favourite locations, and to be honest, I don't think that they could have done a better job with it. And unfortunately, with most games, there was some content that never made it into the final game. Most notably characters like Asajj Ventress, Padme Amidala and Ahsoka Tano, characters that everyone wanted in the game, and we almost did. Unfortunately, EA moved DICE onto Battlefield 5, and so the support for Battlefront 2 was ended before they could even introduce these new characters into the game. And just in case you didn't know, the ISB agent is actually just the Padme face model with a scar on top, and that's just proof that they were so close to getting these characters in the game. Because it really is just such a shame that we never got to see Battlefront 2 in its fullest form. Battlefield 5 was such a disappointment for fans that it would have probably made EA more money if they just kept Battlefront 2 supported and constantly updated. Because if they were still updating the game, I would certainly be playing it way more than I already frequently do. And it's just the fact that Battlefront 2 had such a devoted fan base up to the very end of its life cycle. The servers were full of players, and the fans were eager to see what DICE would cook up for the next DLC. Everyone was really upset when we learnt that Battlefront 2 was going to be discontinued, and it was a really big blow to the community, and it was realistically one of the few multiplayer Star Wars games out there that they were just cutting support for. But the thing is that people are still playing Battlefront 2 more than ever with the lackluster release of the Battlefront Collection. The game didn't die off as most people would have expected it to. And don't get me wrong, the game is definitely not as popular as what it once was in its heyday, but it still has a consistent player base. which is nice for when I want to hop back in occasionally, and so I'm not just stuck playing offline modes. Now I hope you don't mind, I'm going to briefly share a fond memory of mine of Battlefront 2. It's actually the first day I moved into my university flat. I walked into one of my flatmate's rooms and saw him playing Battlefront 2 with his level 300 Boba Fett, and this was the first time meeting him, and we just sat down, played Battlefront 2 split screen, and chatted about the game that we both loved. And that day started a lifelong friendship. So in a way, Battlefront 2 does hold a big part in my life. Battlefront 2 was and still is an amazing Star Wars title to play, with tons of variety in its gameplay that gives you a whole bundle of content to dive into. I would personally say that Battlefront 2 from 2017 is the definitive Battlefront experience out there. It is amazing. It has the most content and, in my opinion, is the most replayable entry in the series. EA did do a lot of things right for Battlefront 2, giving the support it needed to thrive in an oversaturated FPS market. Most of the time you'll find the game on sale, so you'll definitely be able to pick it up for cheap, and trust me, you will not regret it. And that's mainly because the Battlefront Collection was definitely a disappointment and something to regret. It really did disappoint me, the Battlefront Collection. And trust me, I will really hesitate when going to pre-order a game once again. So all I'm saying is pick up EA's version of Battlefront 2 instead. It's way better. Truthfully, the game is nothing like it was at launch. If you watch launch reviews now, they're going to say that the game is full of bugs and it's broken and the mechanics are bad, but all of those bugs and mechanics from the game have been changed, meaning that you will be playing the best version of Battlefront 2 that you could ever play. And I can guarantee that you will absolutely have a blast in Battlefront 2. So what are you going to do? Are you going to hop into EA's Battlefront 2 from 2017, or are you going to stick with the really bad Battlefront Collection? It's up to you, but just let me know in the comment section below. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.